The morning I almost signed my daughter's life away, it was raining so hard I could barely see the road. I remember thinking that the sky itself was trying to stop me from leaving the house. But I didn't listen to the sky. I didn't listen to that tight, sick feeling in my chest that had been living there for 3 weeks. I didn't listen to anything except my son-in-law, who had been very patient, very calm, and very convincing for longer than I care to admit. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you stopped trusting yourself? That you handed over your instincts like a coat at the door politely, without question because the alternative was too ugly to consider? That's where I was that Thursday morning in October, pulling into the parking lot of Maplewood Care and Rehabilitation Center with a pen in my purse and a document I hadn't read carefully enough. My daughter had been at Maplewood for 22 days. Before that, she'd spent 11 days at Mercy General following what her husband described as a terrible fall down the basement stairs. She was 34 years old, a kindergarten teacher who ran half marathons on weekends, and she had somehow slipped on stairs. She had walked up and down 1,000 times and ended up in a medically induced coma with a traumatic brain injury. The neurologist used words like diffuse axonal injury and prolonged recovery. My son-in-law used words like difficult decisions and quality of life. I should have heard the difference. He had called me the night before, warm, measured, just the right amount of grief in his voice. He explained that the specialist he'd consulted, a doctor, Harmon, had reviewed my daughter's recent scans and believed that continued aggressive rehabilitation was prolonging suffering without realistic hope of meaningful recovery. He said there was a facility in Scottsdale, quieter, more focused on comfort and dignity, and that he needed me to co-sign the transfer authorization because I held medical power of attorney, something my daughter had put in place 4 years earlier after her father-in-law had died without one. He said it was what she would have wanted. I cried the whole drive to Maplewood. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself that letting go was the hardest and most loving act a mother could perform. I was wrong about so many things. I had just reached the front desk and was asking for the paperwork when I felt a hand close around my wrist. Not grabbing, holding. Gentle but deliberate, the way you'd stop someone from stepping into traffic. I turned around. She was young, early 20s at most, with dark hair pulled back and a Maplewood badge that said Patience Night Shift Aide. She had clearly been there all night. There were shadows under her eyes and she was still in her scrubs, and she was looking at me with an expression I will never forget for as long as I live. It wasn't pity. It wasn't uncertainty. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for me to arrive and was terrified she'd be too late. "Are you Carol's mother?" she whispered. I said yes. She glanced over her shoulder toward the corridor where my son-in-law was expected to arrive at 9. Then she looked back at me and she said, very quietly, "Please don't sign anything today. I know that sounds crazy. I know I'm just an aide and you have no reason to trust me. But give me 1 hour. That's all I'm asking. 1 hour before you make a decision you cannot take back." I stared at her. Part of me wanted to pull my arm away and tell her she was out of line. Part of me, the part that had been ignoring that sick feeling in my chest for 3 weeks, went very, very still. "What's your name?" I asked. "Patience," she said, "and I promise I've earned it." She led me to the break room at the end of the west hallway, small, smelling of old coffee and hand sanitizer, with a round table and chairs that didn't match. She closed the door. She sat across from me and she put her phone on the table between us, screen up, and she said, "Before I show you anything, I need you to know that I almost didn't do this. I went back and forth for 2 weeks. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself I was reading things wrong, and then 3 nights ago, I heard something that made it impossible to stay quiet." She pressed play. The audio was muffled at first hallway sounds, a cart rolling, the distant beep of a monitor. Then a voice I recognized. My son-in-law, on his phone, just outside the family consultation room, unaware that Patience was restocking the supply closet 6 feet away with the door cracked open. He was speaking quietly, but not quietly enough. He said, "It's moving forward. I've got her mother handled. The transfer's Thursday morning. The paperwork's ready. Once she's in Scottsdale, there's nothing anyone can do." A pause. Then, "The policy pays out on transfer to palliative-only care." Harmon confirmed it. "That's the trigger." Another pause. Then, lower. 850,000, sweetheart. We just have to get through Thursday. Sweetheart. I sat in that break room and I felt the floor tilt under me. Not metaphorically. I actually put my hand on the table to steady myself. My son-in-law, the man who had stood next to my daughter at the altar and wept and promised, was on the phone with someone he called sweetheart, discussing an $850,000 life insurance payout that would be triggered the moment I signed those transfer papers, and my daughter was reclassified as palliative-only care. My daughter, who had a heartbeat, who responded to stimuli, who the rehabilitation nurses, not Dr. Harmon, not the specialist my son-in-law had hired but the actual nurses at Maplewood believed, was showing early signs of responsiveness. "How long have you suspected?" I asked Patience. My voice sounded strange, flat and far away. She took a breath. 6 weeks ago, I was assigned to Carol. I do overnights. I talk to my patients even when they can't respond, because sometimes it helps and you never know who's listening. And about 2 weeks in, I started noticing things. Her vitals would change when her husband visited. Her blood pressure would spike. She'd show increased muscle tension. I mentioned it to the charge nurse, and she said it could be autonomic. Maybe. But then I noticed her husband was always adjusting her IV. Just little adjustments, nothing dramatic enough to flag, and one night I watched him do it when he thought I was in the other wing, and when I checked her chart afterward, the sedation dosage had been modified and no physician had ordered the change. I pressed my hand over my mouth. "I documented it," Patience said. "Every incident, every date and time. I went to my supervisor twice. She said I needed a physician's order to escalate. I went to the patient advocate's office and they said they'd look into it. Nothing happened. And then he announced the transfer to Scottsdale, and I understood that I was running out of time." She slid a small notebook across the table. 2 weeks of handwritten observations, dated and timed, in careful, precise handwriting. The kind of documentation that takes real discipline to maintain when everyone around you is telling you that you're overreacting. "There's something else," she said. She navigated to her email on her phone and turned the screen toward me. 3 weeks earlier, 5 days before my son-in-law had started pushing for the transfer, my daughter had sent me a video message. I had seen it. I had watched it twice. I had not understood what I was watching. In the video, my daughter was in her kitchen. She looked tired but composed. She said she was sending me some documents for safekeeping her medical POA, her financial records, a copy of her life insurance policy, and she said, almost offhandedly, almost as if she was trying to make it sound casual, "Mom, if anything ever happens to me, I just want you to have all of this. You're the only person I completely trust." I had thought she was being thorough, practical. My daughter was always organized. Patience pointed to the timestamp on the email. "She sent that video to me too," she said quietly. "I'm on her emergency contact list. She updated it 2 months ago after she transferred here for outpatient PT. She sent it to her sister. To me. And to you. Same message, same documents. She wasn't being practical, Mrs. She stopped. She was leaving a trail." My daughter had been afraid. She had known something was wrong, and she had been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for the people she trusted most, hoping one of us would find our way to the end of it. I had been holding the pen. I had been 6 minutes away from signing. "What do we do?" I asked. Patience had already thought this through. She had the charge nurse on her side, the overnight charge nurse, who had seen the same documentation Patience had and had been waiting for someone with legal authority to act on it. She had the name of a patient rights attorney she had looked up 3 days earlier, and she had already called the hospital's internal compliance office that morning, before I arrived, to create a formal record that a concerned staff member had raised concerns about a patient's care and safety. "The transfer is scheduled for 8 o'clock, she said. "It's 7:14. Your son-in-law will be here at 9 to confirm, but the transfer van is coming at 8. If it comes and you haven't authorized the counterhold, they may move her anyway under his authorization." "I have medical power of attorney," I said, and for the first time I understood what that actually meant. Not a formality, not a piece of paper my daughter had filed away out of caution, a shield, a legal instrument that meant my signature outweighed his, that my refusal to authorize had the force of law behind it. "Yes," Patience said, "and I need you to use it right now." We moved fast. The charge nurse, a broad-shouldered woman named Dolores, who had been a nurse for 31 years and had the kind of calm authority that made everyone around her stand up straighter, met us in the hallway. She had already pulled my daughter's chart and flagged 3 discrepancies in the sedation records that she said needed immediate physician review before any transfer could be authorized. She placed a formal hold on the transfer order at 7:21. She notified the facility administrator. I called the patient rights attorney whose name Patience had written on a post-it. He answered on the second ring and listened without interrupting. He told me to stay in the building, not to sign anything, and not to speak to my son-in-law without him present. He said he would make 2 calls and call me back within 15 minutes. He called back in 11. Adult Protective Services has an intake open for your daughter as of 7:43, he said. And I've spoken to someone at the insurance company. You have every right as POA to request a full review of any policy action tied to your daughter's care status. I've submitted that request on your behalf. They've frozen the policy pending investigation. Frozen. The $850,000 my son-in-law had been carefully, patiently maneuvering toward frozen. At 8:02, the transfer van arrived in the parking lot. Dolores met the driver at the front entrance, paperwork in hand, and explained that the transfer had been placed on administrative hold pending a physician review and a POA authorization dispute. The driver, a young man who clearly had no interest in the middle of whatever this was, said he'd wait for 30 minutes and then he'd have to call dispatch. He ended up waiting 12. My son-in-law arrived at 8:47, 53 minutes ahead of schedule. He came through the door looking the way he always looked, put together, concerned, carrying coffee in a cardboard tray like a man who remembered small gestures. He saw me, and he smiled, and I watched his face for the microsecond before the smile, the fraction of a second when his expression was completely unguarded, and what I saw there was not grief. "There you are," he said. "I tried calling. Is everything okay? Have you already signed?" "No," I said. "I haven't signed anything." Something shifted in his face. Very small, very fast. "The van's already here. We should get moving. They have a window." "The transfer is on hold," I said. "And there are some concerns about my daughter's care that need to be reviewed before anything moves forward." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked past me, at Dolores, at Patience standing at the nurse's station. Something in his expression went flat, and careful the way ice goes before it cracks. "What kind of concerns?" he said, and his voice was still smooth, still measured, but the warmth had left it entirely, and I thought, there you are. There's the real thing underneath all those cups of coffee and careful phone calls. "The kind that APS is now aware of," I said. "The police arrived at 10:15. Not because I called them, though I would have, but because when the insurance company's fraud investigation unit received the attorney's request and cross-referenced it with the policy terms and a flagged claim, from 6 weeks earlier, they had already notified law enforcement. There is a particular satisfaction in watching something you built carefully and secretly come apart because you were not the only careful, secret keeper in the room." My son-in-law was escorted out of the Maplewood parking lot in the back of a police car at 10:41 in the morning. He had his hands folded in his lap and he was looking straight ahead. He did not look back. I stood at the window of the family waiting room and I watched the car turn out of the lot, and I felt something release in my chest that I had not known was clenched until the moment it let go. The investigation took 4 months. What they found was meticulous and terrible. My son-in-law had been having an affair for 2 years with a woman he'd met at a conference. She was the sweetheart on the recording, and she had been involved in the planning from the beginning. The life insurance policy had been taken out 18 months earlier, quietly, with my son-in-law listed as sole beneficiary. My daughter had found a withdrawal from their joint account that she couldn't account for. That was when she'd started getting afraid, started making copies of documents, started quietly updating emergency contact lists and sending video messages to the people she trusted. She had been telling us without being able to say it directly, because she was afraid and because she loved him, and because it is very hard to believe that someone you married is capable of what she was, slowly, reluctantly beginning to understand he was capable of. The basement stairs had not been an accident. The forensic analysis confirmed that a small amount of a prescription sedative, the same medication that had been making unauthorized appearances in my daughter's IV records, had been found in the glass of wine she'd had the night of the fall. Not enough to be dangerous on its own. Enough to make stairs treacherous. My son-in-law was charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and criminal tampering with a patient's medical care. His girlfriend was charged as a co-conspirator. Dr. Harmon, the specialist who had reviewed my daughter's scans and declared aggressive rehabilitation futile, was charged with medical fraud and lost his license. It turned out he had a history of providing convenient second opinions for families in contentious estate disputes, always for a fee, always reaching the same conclusion. The sedation dosage modifications, the unauthorized adjustments to the IV, the carefully cultivated picture of a woman too damaged to recover all of it had been designed to make my daughter's body do what my son-in-law needed it to do on the timeline the insurance policy required. What it had not accounted for was a 23-year-old overnight aide who talked to her patients because she believed they were listening, and who had the stubbornness and the courage to keep documenting when every official channel told her she was probably reading things wrong. My daughter woke up. Not all at once, it wasn't like that. Wasn't the movie version where the eyelids flutter and someone gasps. It was gradual and non-linear, and sometimes one step forward and half a step back. The way real recovery works, the way it goes when the brain is relearning how to do things it already knows. By December, she was tracking movement with her eyes. By February, she was squeezing my hand on command. By April, she said my name, and I sat in the chair next to her bed and cried for a long time while she watched me with the patient, slightly exasperated expression she has always had when she thinks I'm being dramatic. She is not the same as she was. I want to be honest about that. There are things she works harder at now, words that take a moment longer to find, a left side that still doesn't fully cooperate. The occupational therapist says meaningful improvement can continue for years. My daughter says she has years. She says it like it's a decision she's made, and knowing her, it probably is. Last summer, she flew with me to visit my sister in Vermont. We took the train up through the mountains, and she fell asleep against the window with the afternoon light on her face, and I sat there and thought about that morning in October, the rain, the pen in my purse, the 6 minutes I had between the front desk and a wrist held gently but deliberately by a young woman who had been awake all night and still chose to stay. Patience left Maplewood 8 months after everything happened. She is in nursing school now, finishing her second year. She said she always wanted to be a nurse but had been working as an aide to save money for tuition. She texted me a photo last spring of her in her clinical rotation scrubs, standing in front of a hospital entrance, squinting into the sun and grinning. I have it saved in a folder on my phone that I look at when I need to remember what ordinary courage looks like. It doesn't announce itself. That's the thing nobody tells you. Courage in real life doesn't come with music or a decisive moment where you know with certainty you're doing the right thing. It comes in a break room over bad coffee with shadows under your eyes and the very real possibility that no one will believe you, and you do it anyway because the alternative is something you cannot live inside of. My son-in-law is serving 18 years. His girlfriend is serving 9. Dr. Harmon's medical license has been permanently revoked, and he is facing civil litigation from 2 other families whose relatives he assessed conveniently, terminally for similar fees. The $850,000 life insurance policy was voided. Every cent of the marital estate is now in my daughter's name. My daughter's divorce was finalized 11 months after she regained enough capacity to understand the documents and sign her own name. She signed them without hesitation. I stood beside her in the attorney's office, and I thought about all the things I almost signed away: her future, her recovery, the years ahead of her that no specialist had the right to take, and I thought about how close it was, how terrifyingly close, how everything that followed had balanced on those 6 minutes and one hand on my wrist. If you are reading this and something in your chest is telling you that something is wrong with a diagnosis, with a document, with a person who seems very calm and very certain about a decision that benefits them, I am asking you, from the other side of the worst morning of my life, do not be as polite as I almost was. Do not hand your instincts over at the door. Ask the question nobody wants you to ask. Read the document you're told is a formality. Find the person who has been awake all night and is still standing there because they believe someone is listening. Trust the young woman who holds your wrist. And if you are that young woman, if you are Patience, if you are the one who sees what everyone else is explaining away, please don't stop documenting. Please don't stop knocking on doors even when they stay closed. Please don't decide it's not your place. Because sometimes your place is exactly where you're standing, at exactly the moment you're standing in it, and the whole weight of someone's future is resting quietly in your hands. My daughter called me this morning. She's registering for a ceramics class, something she's always wanted to try and kept putting off. She said she figured life was too short to keep putting things off. Then she laughed at herself for saying it, because, of course, she knows better than anyone how literally true that is. I told her I was proud of her. She said, "Mom, it's a ceramics class." I said, "I'm allowed to be proud." She laughed. She sounds like herself again. Not exactly the same, better, I think, in some ways, more deliberately herself than she was before. Like she knows now what she's choosing to be, and she's choosing it on purpose. That's the thing about being given back something you almost lost. You stop carrying it lightly. To everyone watching, thank you for being here, for listening, for caring about the stories that remind us why it matters to pay attention, to speak up, and to stay. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment and let me know. I read every one of them. And I'll see you in the next story.